Hey guys, Frank here and welcome to another episode of How Did I Shoot This One? And today, oh my, you are absolutely gonna love this image and you're gonna laugh when you hear how incredibly easy it is. But in all honesty, it's also very hard. So what the hell am I talking about? I'm talking about these images and I can't show you just one. I have to show you a few. So what did I shoot here? How did I do this in Photoshop? Frank, is this a retouching class? I have to disappoint you a little bit, but on the other hand, you're going to be really happy when I tell you this. Why fake it when you can create it? These shots are, without over exaggerating, 100% out of camera. The only thing I did retouch is give it a little bit more contrast with a film look, nothing more. So how did I create something like this? Well, you have to realize that when we use photography, we have different kinds of lighting. The first, of course, that we know in our studio is strobes. Now, strobe will give you a pulse of power and then it will die out. We call that the raise of the strobe and the cutoff of the strobe. The faster this goes, the faster the flash duration. Now, the flash duration is important for freezing motion. And this is why it's possible to shoot a perfectly frozen model in mid-air with a shutter speed of 1/125th of a second. There's only one thing that you have to be really careful for. Your studio has to be 100% dark. Because if it's not dark, you will actually see the lighting coming in from your studio, or in other words, the ambient light. Now, one of the tips I always give people is the first image that you shoot in your photo shoot it without the strobes. The reason for this is very simple. That image should come in 100% dark. If you see some lighting from your studio, you now know that you have spill light. And spill light shouldn't be a 100% problem, but you do have to realize that if it's in your image, it also has another color temperature. So it can infect your image, even if it's just a little bit there. So my advice is always take out the spill light. Now, how can you check your spill light very, very quick? Of course, you can shoot with your camera and just check your display. In my opinion, it's much wiser and much faster to shoot tethered in your studio, and especially with shoots like this. Now, what is shooting tethered? Tethered means that you connect your camera to a device that shows you the images in a larger screen. In my opinion, it's best to shoot RAW, because with RAW, you can do presets, for example, in your favorite RAW converter, but you also see the images in the best possible resolution, so you can zoom in, check the sharpness, and of course check your composition and the small shadows. The software I'm using in our studio and also on location is actually Cascable. The reason I'm choosing Cascable is actually pretty simple, because it's an iPad app. By the way, they recently also released a new version and now you can also use it on the desktop computer. That's awesome, right? But I'm using it mostly on the iPad. So you might wonder why the iPad? Very simple. The iPad has a very long battery life. If you're using it on location, you don't have to worry about a keyboard that can collect dust. You don't have to worry about all your slots that are open. The iPad is just a great solution to shoot tethered. And of course, no software that can fail. If something fails, you just swipe up, you start the app again, and you're done. So the iPad takes away a lot of stress, and software like Cascable works great for tethering. And in this setup, that tethering is incredibly important, because we have to make sure that everything looks the way that I want. So let's talk about the lighting setup. To get something like this, we have to combine two light sources. We already talked about strobes, and strobe is a pulse, and we talked about ambient light. Only in this case, I'm talking about ambient light in the studio. For this shot, we're using ambient light in a different way. We're using angel wings that actually have LED lights. Now, if you want something like this, don't worry, they're very cheap. You can buy them on almost any online store, or for example, AliExpress or Temu. They sell for about 18 or 20 euros. Do they emit a lot of light? They're pretty bright, but they won't stun you with, oh, they're so bright. But you actually don't need very bright lights for what we're gonna do. Now, when we use ambient light or continuous lighting in our studio, we have to realize that light accumulates over time. That means if I shoot something with continuous lighting on 1 second, it will be much brighter than, for example, on 125th of a second. In other words, the longer the shutter speed, the more of the ambient light will cumulative add to your image. In other words, it will get brighter. This is a great way, for example, in the backdrop to create more of those lights. For example, if you look behind me, you can see the lights. If my videographer would actually open up the aperture, you will see me blowing out and those lights getting much brighter. And that's because we're shooting with continuous lighting. Now, there is a problem in this setup why I have to discuss this. Our strobes also use continuous lighting. You might wonder like, hey, wait a minute, you're using strobes. What is continuous lighting in strobes? It's the modeling light. So to take an image where we combine continuous lighting and strobes, we have to take into account two very important things. The first thing, can we separate the strobes from the continuous lighting? In most cases, no, as soon as you start adding motion or longer shutter speed. For the very simple reason, the strobe will freeze your model, but the modeling light will still light your model. So at that point, your model may be frozen, but if you use a shutter speed of 1 or 2 seconds, she will move around and you see this really weird stuff going on. The other thing that you have to take into account, where do I place my continuous lighting versus my strobes? Do I want the whole model to be lit with a strobe, or do I only want part of my model to be lit with a strobe? You might already figured out we don't want our whole model lit with the strobe, because if we light our whole model with the strobe, those little lights, well, they will show up, but it doesn't really give you that contrast because you want those light against a darker backdrop. So in this case, I'm using a very tight light source, and tight light sources are always light sources with grids in my studio. So a light source aimed at our model with a grid to make sure that the light only hits her face. And of course, she's wearing the wings with the lights. But I still didn't explain to you guys how we get all those nice swirls in there. Now we're getting there. The moment I have to shoot my model, I have to take into account the shutter speed, but also the freezing of the motion and the modeling light. But how about focus? Because we still have to focus our cameras, right? And this is where we are using our iPhones, or any other phone that you have. The phone has a so-called flashlight. And this is what we're using to focus. So in other words, we have one assistant with a phone aimed straight at our model's face. I'm aiming my camera towards my model. I'm focusing. I hear my focus beep. And now I tell my assistant, okay, turn off the light. Are you ready, Nadine? 1, 2. Yeah, and what happens after 3? Did you already guess it? Yes. The moment she stands there, that's our strobe image. That's when the strobe fires. That's where you see her face. But after that, she has 1 second or 2 seconds to turn around. Now, as soon as she starts to turn around and move the wings, you will get all these nice patterns. Now, if you do it just like, whoop, 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 let's do something, you will get weird patterns, as you can see in one of those images. But of course, we want those swirls to be nice, like she's beamed up, right? And that's the part where you have to practice. And this is where shooting tethered is vital, because now you can see all the small details. So how did we shoot it? Very simple. Look straight at the light, Nadine. Are you ready? Okay, I got my focus. Turn off the lights. 1, 2, 3. I shoot. The strobe goes off, and then Nadine starts to twist and turn. And at that moment, you get those nice twists. And I was looking at the image and I was going like, I think we can do better. How about if you are beamed up? So at that point, I said, okay, twist and scream while you're looking up in the air. This is a little bit weird for the model because she has to do 2 things next to each other. First, it's the shot, scream without making sound, and then within 1 second she has to turn around. Now, of course, we tried different setups, and here you can see some of the images, and I think they turned out pretty well. However, there was always one thing that bugged me, right? Hey, we can do something else that's more interesting. And I remember, of course, that a few years ago I did something similar during a wedding. And that's was zooming in and zooming out. Now, you might wonder like, hey, does that really give you cool effects? Yes, it does. The only thing you have to realize is when you zoom in, it works great. When you zoom out, it doesn't. And think about this. When you zoom in on your model, right? You have her face full blown in the frame. Now you press fire. The face is covered with your light from your strobes. And now you zoom out. Doesn't really work because now the face is in the frame and you only see all those lights going around your model, and it just doesn't make any sense. However, when you zoom out, You have your whole model in the frame, you take the picture, and now you zoom in. Now you get some really cool effects, because now the model is frozen, so you won't see the model anymore changing, but all that light streaks come up at the camera because you're zooming in. You could even go so far as zoom in and tilt your camera. If you look at some of the final results, you will actually see that I was experimenting a lot with angling the camera, zooming in and zooming out. Now, of course, the problem is during a workshop, we don't have a lot of time to shoot those images. So I think this is something I'm going to revisit in the future with, for example, colored lightings, different kinds of setups, because this really tasted for more. It's a technique I used many, many years ago, and at that moment I didn't have the knowledge and also not the gear to pull it off completely. And I think when I look at these results, I think we're getting there with the modern equipment. And of course, nowadays we can use much higher ISOs than in the past. Now there's one final tip. Continuous lighting is cumulative, so that means it builds up over time. However, if the continuous lighting is stable, it will burn out. So in other words, if you just hold the strobe like this and wait for 5 seconds, you will have a white spot. However, if I do the same 5 seconds and I move it around like this, you won't have a white spot, but you will see all the streaks of lights. So when you want to do something like this with longer shutter speeds, it's really important to keep moving your model in the same position and the same angles. Just keep her moving, because as soon as he stands still, you have the chance that you will lose those beautiful colors and they will actually turn into white. Now, some white isn't a problem, but it doesn't make any sense to have beautiful colors and then just let your model move around and only have white streaks. Hey, we can talk about this for a long time. Let's take a look at the behind the scenes video so you can see everything in its setup. And I have to warn you, this video will be grainy, this video will be noisy, because it was shot with not a lot of light. As you can see, I think a beautiful lighting setup with great results. You might wonder, how did he do that in Photoshop? He didn't. He shot it because, well, yeah. Let me discuss this with one final tip for you guys. Why fake it when you can create it? And by the way, if you want merch, we sell these. Just drop us an email and maybe you will drink your coffee, your chocolate milk or whatever from the Why Fake It When You Can Create It mug. And if you're left-handed, or you just want to do it in your right hand, you can also learn with Frank. How about that? Hey guys, if you have any questions about continuous lighting, about strobes or Cascable, iPads or whatever, leave them in the comments below and maybe you will see your question answered in the next episode of Digital Classroom. See you again next time, and don't forget, like, hit the bell notification and tell other people about our channel. Bye guys.